For more of this kind of content, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. The needle hovered just above his skin. One push, and it would be over. Selara gripped the syringe tight. The man before her was too dangerous to be left as he was. He knew too much, had seen too much. The things he had uncovered about her people, about their presence on Earth, were enough to put both humans and aliens in danger. She had watched him for weeks, studied his routines, knew the way he fell asleep at exactly 12:17 a.m., the way his muscles twitched in deep sleep. He was alone in this house, no one to call for help. It was supposed to be easy, in and out. But now, here she was, standing over his bed, her gloved hand trembling as the cold metal tip of the syringe brushed against his neck. A simple injection, a neural wipe. Daniel Kane would wake up in the morning thinking his laptop had crashed, that his research had disappeared into a corrupted hard drive, that everything he had discovered was nothing more than a frustrating accident. One push. Do it. Selara hesitated. It was only for a second, and then his eyes snapped open. Selara barely had time to react before his hand shot up like a striking viper, latching onto her wrist with terrifying strength. The syringe slipped from her grip, clattering to the hardwood floor. Shit, Daniel moved fast. Too fast for a human waking from sleep. He shoved forward, his weight slamming into hers, knocking her backward. She caught herself just before hitting the nightstand, twisting with unnatural speed, breaking his grip. He didn't hesitate. He lunged again. Selara ducked, sweeping her leg out, but Daniel saw it coming. He pivoted at the last second, absorbing the hit, then used the momentum to tackle her. They hit the ground hard. Daniel pinned her down, his forearm pressing against her throat. Selara growled, baring her teeth. He had no idea what he was dealing with. With a sharp twist, she wrenched free, using his own force against him. He rolled, but she was already moving, flipping them over. Now she was on top. Daniel struggled, but Selara shoved her knee into his chest, her hands gripping his wrists, locking him in place. He was staring at her now, taking in the details he had missed in the heat of the fight. The dark gray hair, the inhuman black eyes, the smooth, violet-toned skin. Recognition flickered in his gaze. My God, he breathed. You're one of them. This was bad. Her cover was blown. Her mission had failed. And now, there was only one way this night could end. She had to erase him. One way or another. The syringe was on the floor, too far to reach without letting him go. Her other weapons were hidden beneath her suit, but even if she reached them, she'd never get the chance to use them before he made his move. And he would make a move. Kill him. The thought surged through her like muscle memory, like instinct. It was the only logical solution. He knew what she was now. He would never stop hunting for answers. But her fingers wouldn't tighten around his throat. Daniel's lips parted, his voice rough. You're hesitating, Selara snarled, shoving his wrists harder into the floor. Shut up. His voice was low, edged with something almost mocking. You can't do it, can you? She bared her teeth, anger flaring hot in her chest. I should. Daniel exhaled sharply, eyes flicking to the side toward the syringe, still glinting faintly in the darkness. Selara saw the way his fingers twitched, like he was testing how fast he could move. He wasn't going to beat her. Selara moved first. She released one of his wrists. Going for the syringe, Daniel exploded into motion. His freed hand shot up, fingers curling around her throat. He used the momentum to push upward, flipping them over again. She hit the ground hard, her breath escaping in a sharp gasp, as Daniel pinned her down, his weight pressing into her. His fingers dug into her wrist, forcing her hand away from the syringe. Damn him! Selara fought, twisting, bucking, trying to throw him off. But Daniel had learned. He wasn't just using strength anymore, he was using technique, adjusting to her speed, countering her movements. His grip tightened around her wrist, forcing her hand to the floor. He was winning. She would not lose to a human. With a vicious snarl, she surged upward, slamming her forehead into his. Daniel grunted, momentarily dazed. It was all the opening she needed. She twisted her arm free, rolled backward, and sprang to her feet in one fluid motion. Daniel was fast, but she was faster. Selara lunged for the syringe. Daniel kicked it. The needle skidded across the floor, spinning out of reach. Damn it. Selara's heart pounded. This was spiraling out of control. She had lost the element of surprise, lost her weapon. Her mission was already a disaster, but she couldn't walk away empty-handed. She had to erase his memory. If she couldn't do it cleanly, she'd do it the hard way. She moved. In a blur of motion, she kicked the nightstand straight into him. Daniel barely had time to react. The heavy wood slammed into his legs, knocking him off balance. Selara took the opening and ran. She darted toward the door. The hallway loomed ahead, dark and empty. She could still salvage this. She'd be back. She'd finish the job. But then Daniel's hand snagged her wrist. Selara twisted, slamming her elbow into his ribs. He grunted, but he didn't let go. His grip tightened, and before she could break free, he yanked her backward. Her back hit the wall, his arm pinning her there. His face was close, too close. They were both breathing hard. His voice was low, rough, demanding. "Who sent you?" Selara glared, lips curling into a sneer. "Like I'd tell you." His fingers tightened around her wrist, his body still pressed against hers, keeping her from moving. Daniel's jaw tensed. "You tried to erase me," she exhaled sharply. "I still might." Daniel's gaze flicked over her face, searching, reading her. Selara's blood boiled. "You're enjoying this," she spat. Daniel's grip didn't loosen. If anything, he pressed her harder against the wall. "No," he murmured. "But I think you are." Selara's breath hitched. For a fraction of a second, neither of them moved. The tension was suffocating. Then Selara shoved him, hard. Daniel stumbled back, barely catching himself. But by the time he looked up, Selara was gone. She ran. Through the hallway, out the door, into the humid Florida night. Her ship was cloaked nearby, hidden between the trees at the edge of the property. She sprinted toward it. This wasn't over. She had made a mistake tonight, a mistake that would cost her. Daniel Kane wasn't just any human. He had fought her, matched her, and worst of all, he had made her hesitate. Selara reached her ship, palming the side panel. The door hissed open, revealing the sleek interior. She stepped inside, exhaling sharply, her hands still trembling. She had failed, but she'd be back. And next time, Daniel Kane wouldn't wake up. Daniel Kane didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She was real, a living, breathing alien. And she had tried to erase him. The weight of it settled heavily on his chest, but beneath the shock, beneath the holy fucking shit realization of it all, there was something else, something colder. She would come back. That much he knew for certain. She had failed tonight, and he had the feeling that failure wasn't something she was used to. Next time, she'd make damn sure she succeeded, which meant he had two options: run or fight. Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Running was out of the question. He had spent years uncovering the truth, chasing scraps of evidence, piecing together the impossible puzzle of extraterrestrial life. And now, the proof had come straight to his doorstep, in the form of a violet-skinned, black-eyed, impossibly fast assassin. He wasn't about to throw that away. If she was coming back, he'd be ready for her. 3 days later, Selara crouched on the rooftop across from Daniel Kane's house, her body tense, her breathing slow and controlled. She had been watching him for hours. He wasn't acting like a man who had barely escaped death. No signs of paranoia. No frantic attempts to leave town. No desperate calls to law enforcement. Instead, he was waiting. Lights on, doors unlocked, sitting in plain view, flipping through a worn leather notebook, his face unreadable. Selara exhaled slowly, her grip tightening around the new syringe in her hand. That was fine. She wouldn't hesitate this time. She wouldn't let him get inside her head. Because that's what had happened that night, wasn't it? He had gotten under her skin. For years, Selara had been trained to be untouchable. Cold, precise, a perfect infiltrator. No emotions, no second thoughts. And yet, in that moment, his hands locked around her wrists, his body pressing into hers, his blue eyes burning into her like he could see straight through her. She had hesitated. Selara clenched her jaw. Never again. She moved, silent, fast, crossing the rooftop in a blur, then dropping down onto the balcony outside his office window. She could see him through the glass, still seated at his desk, one hand resting against his jaw, waiting. Selara pressed her fingers to the window frame. Unlocked. She slipped inside, stepping soundlessly across the floor. Daniel didn't move. His eyes flicked up from his notebook. "Took you long enough." Selara froze. He had expected her, which meant a sharp click sounded behind her. Selara twisted just in time to see the steel doors slide shut. The lock engaged with a mechanical hiss. Shit. She whipped back around. Daniel was already on his feet. "That door's on a reinforced timer." He rolled his shoulders. "No way out until I say so." He thought he had trapped her. He had no idea what he was dealing with. She lunged. Daniel dodged. Selara's fist whistled past his jaw, grazing his skin as he twisted. His speed was startling, not alien fast, but fast enough. He grabbed her arm. Twisting, she countered, flipping her body in a fluid motion, using his momentum against him. Daniel hit the desk hard, but he recovered instantly, shoving off it and spinning to face her again. Selara let a slow smirk curl across her lips. He had learned. Not bad, Kane. She prowled forward, rolling her shoulders. Know how this ends. But let's be honest. Daniel's lips twitched. Yeah, he said. We do. Then he pulled a gun from the desk drawer. Selara's body locked. Not because of the weapon. Human guns were crude, primitive things, but because of what it meant. Selara tilted her head, staring down the barrel of the gun. You won't shoot me. Daniel's grip was steady. You sure about that? She took a slow step forward. If you wanted me dead, you would have gone to the authorities. You would have left town. Instead, you set a trap. Daniel exhaled sharply. Damn it. There it was. Selara smirked. He needed her alive. But before she could open her mouth, Daniel moved. Selara reacted instantly, surging forward too late. Daniel grabbed the syringe from the desk and slammed it into her neck. Selara stiffened. Her body went rigid, muscles locking up as the neural inhibitor rushed into her system. Her vision blurred. Daniel was still holding her, his grip tight on her arms as he lowered her to the ground. You, he muttered. Selara fought to move, fought to speak, but the drug was already spreading through her bloodstream. Her eyelids grew heavy. Her last thought before the darkness swallowed her whole. He won. Selara woke with a pounding headache. The world was slow to come back into focus. She tried to move. Nothing. Her arms were pinned behind her, wrists bound with something strong. Her vision sharpened. A small room, bare walls, a desk, a single overhead light, and across from her Daniel Kane. He was leaning against the desk, arms crossed over his chest, watching her with sharp, unreadable eyes. Selara inhaled slowly, testing her restraints. A faint hum vibrated against her skin. Neural binders. Shit. You gonna tell me who sent you? He asked. Selara tilted her head, studying him. The last time she'd been here, she'd been the predator. Now, the tables had turned. I work alone, she said smoothly. Daniel's brows lifted. That's funny, because someone else just tried to kill me. Selara kept her face blank, but inside, she was calculating. Daniel's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, looming over her. You were sent to erase my memory, but now they want me dead. Why? Selara hesitated. For once, she wasn't sure of the answer. Daniel noticed. His eyes darkened, his voice lower now. You don't know, do you? Selara clenched her jaw. Whoever sent you, he said. Problem. They don't trust you anymore. That means you and I have a Selara narrowed her eyes. You assume I care. Daniel's smirk was humorless. Stepped back, giving her a pointed look. If they sent a second agent, they're not just after me. They're after you too. Selara stilled. The realization slid into her like a knife. It made sense. She had failed. She had let Daniel Kane live. Her people would see that as a betrayal, which meant she was just as much of a loose end as he was. Selara swallowed. She wasn't ready to admit it out loud, but Daniel saw it anyway. His smirk deepened. You're gonna need me, sweetheart. Selara scowled. Don't call me that. Daniel grinned. He had her. 20 minutes later, Selara was free. The neural binders lay discarded on the floor, and she sat across from Daniel at the small dining table, tense, watching him. He hadn't restrained her again, which meant he wasn't afraid of her. Selara wasn't sure if that was arrogance or stupidity. She studied him carefully, taking in the details she hadn't paid attention to before. The sharp angles of his face, the rough edge of stubble along his jaw, the faint bruises already forming where she had hit him during their fight. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. To the club. So, you're a rogue agent now. Welcome. Selara crossed her arms. Daniel snorted. I am not on your side. Could have fooled me. She narrowed her eyes. Daniel smirked. Sure. This is temporary. Selara exhaled sharply, forcing herself to focus. This doesn't change anything, she said. Daniel tilted his head. You still know too much. So, what's stopping you from killing me? Selara hesitated. That split-second pause, it was all he needed to see. You hesitated, he murmured. She shoved her chair back, standing abruptly, hunting us. We need to move. My people won't stop. Daniel exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Yeah, I figured. He stood too, grabbing his laptop and shoving it into a bag. I have a safe house. Selara arched a brow. You expect me to follow you to an undisclosed location? Daniel smirked. You got a better idea? Selara didn't. She exhaled slowly. Fine. For now, they needed each other. But that didn't mean she trusted him. Daniel grabbed his keys. Selara followed him toward the door, her pulse steady, her mind sharp. They arrived at the safe house an hour later. It was a small cabin tucked deep into the swamps, surrounded by thick cypress trees and dense underbrush. The place had been a backup plan, a shelter stocked with supplies, a fallback in case his research ever put him in danger. He never thought he'd actually need it. Selara stepped inside first, scanning the interior with the sharpness of someone who didn't trust her surroundings. The cabin was simple. A single story, open floor plan, a modest kitchen, a worn couch, a small bedroom down the hall, one bed. Daniel stepped in behind her, tossing his bag onto the counter. Us off their radar for a while. It's not much, but it'll keep Selara's gaze flicked to him. For how long? Daniel shrugged. Depends how pissed off your people are. Selara scoffed. They don't get pissed off. They calculate. They adapt. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. So, what's their next move? Selara hesitated. Then, reluctantly, she spoke. They'll send someone stronger. Daniel's jaw tightened. Stronger than you? Selara met his gaze. Yes. Silence. Daniel exhaled slowly. Great. The hours passed. Neither of them slept. Daniel sat at the table, going over his notes, scanning through his laptop, trying to figure out what exactly he had discovered that had made him a target in the first place. Selara stood by the window, watching the tree line, arms crossed. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. You should get some sleep. Selara didn't move from the window. Else, you think I can sleep knowing they'll send someone? Daniel smirked. Well, you could at least pretend. Make me feel better. Selara finally turned to face him. Is that your priority right now? Feeling better? Daniel met her gaze. Number staying alive is. Selara held his stare for a long moment. Then slowly, she stepped away from the window. Fine, she said, but I'm taking the bed. Daniel blinked. Excuse me? Selara arched a brow. You heard me. Daniel scoffed. Yeah, I did. Just can't believe you actually said it. Selara tilted her head. You want to argue about it? Daniel ran a tongue over his teeth. You know what? Fine. Take the bed. Selara smirked. Good choice. She disappeared down the hall. Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. This was going to be a long night. 2 hours later, Daniel lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep. He pushed off the couch, moving toward the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. And then, a sound. Software. Barely there. A breath. Daniel turned. Selara stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching him. She looked different. The sharpness was gone. Her shoulders weren't as rigid. Her expression wasn't as guarded, and she wasn't wearing her suit. Just a simple black tank top and fitted pants. Her silver gray hair loose around her shoulders. Daniel swallowed. Couldn't sleep. Selara murmured. Daniel exhaled. Number. She studied him for a moment, then stepped forward. Daniel tensed as she got closer. Too close. You keep watching me, she said softly. Daniel smirked, but it was weaker this time. Yeah, well, you did try to kill me. Selara's lips curled slightly. If I had really tried, you'd be dead. It wasn't a threat. It was the truth. And yet, she had spared him. Selara took another step. This was dangerous. Selara's black eyes flicked over his face. You still don't trust me. Daniel's voice was rough. Should I? Selara exhaled. Then very slowly she reached out. Her fingers brushed against his wrist. A light touch, barely there, but it sent a shiver through him anyway. Daniel swallowed hard. Selara's voice was quiet now. I don't trust you either. Daniel didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, after a long moment, Selara stepped back. The tension snapped, the moment breaking. She turned, disappearing back into the bedroom, leaving Daniel standing there, breathless. He didn't sleep the rest of the night, and deep down, he knew she didn't either. It happened just after sunrise, a single ripple in the air, subtle, almost invisible. If Daniel hadn't been looking, he might have missed it. Selara didn't. She moved instantly, a blur of motion, grabbing Daniel and shoving him backward. A split second later, the door exploded inward. Daniel barely had time to react before two figures stepped through the smoking wreckage of the entrance. Humanoid, tall, armed, violet-skinned, but not like Selara. Their features were sharper, their eyes colder. Their weapons were already drawn. Selara went rigid. The taller of the two stepped forward, leveling a sleek silver blade at her chest. Selara Vale. He let the name drag out, mocking. You should have stayed dead. Selara didn't move. So should you, Kieran. The second assassin, a woman with a jagged scar down the side of her face, scoffed. We're sent to erase a human. Her black eyes flicked toward Daniel. Instead, you're hiding with him, protecting him. Solara's jaw clenched. Kieran smirked. That makes you a traitor. Solara's grip tightened around the blade she had drawn, decided to interfere. I was doing my job until you idiots. Not anymore. Kieran shrugged. Then he moved. Daniel saw it too late. Before he could react, Kieran's blade sliced through the air. Selara blocked it just in time. Metal clashed against metal, the impact sending a sharp crack through the air. Selara twisted, using the momentum to shove Kieran backward. She wasn't fighting for Daniel. She was fighting for herself. But the second assassin was already moving. Daniel barely saw the blur of motion before something slammed into his ribs, hard. Pain exploded through his body. He hit the floor, gasping, the wind knocked out of him. The woman stood over him, blade raised, about to strike. Daniel rolled, grabbing his rifle. He fired. The shot grazed her shoulder, just enough to throw her off balance, but she recovered too fast. Daniel scrambled backward, trying to get another shot off, but she was already on him. A sharp boot to his chest. Daniel crashed into the table, pain splintering through his ribs. His vision blurred. Damn it. He had seconds, maybe less. She raised her blade, aiming for his throat. Then Selara moved, not toward Kieran, toward Daniel. Her body slammed into the female assassin, knocking her off him. Daniel gasped for breath, rolling onto his side. Selara was on the other woman in an instant. There was no hesitation now, no hesitation at all. Solara's blade sliced through the assassin's side, deep. A sharp, choked cry. Blood splattered across the wooden floor. The woman staggered, clutching her side. Selara didn't give her time to recover. She struck again, swift and brutal. The assassin hit the ground, not moving. Daniel's head was still spinning, but he forced himself up. No time to think, because Kieran was already on her. Selara barely had time to turn before he drove his blade toward her ribs. Daniel reacted on instinct. He raised the rifle and fired. The bullet tore through Kieran's shoulder. He snarled, staggering back. Selara didn't waste the opening. She moved in a blur, her blade plunging straight through his chest. Kieran froze. His eyes widened. His lips parted like he wanted to speak. Then he collapsed. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Selara exhaled slowly, pulling the blade free. Daniel leaned against the overturned table, his breath still ragged. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Selara turned to him. She was breathing hard. Her violet skin was streaked with blood, and her black eyes, they weren't unreadable anymore. Daniel swallowed, still feeling the ache in his ribs. You didn't have to do that. Selara stared at him. Then, slowly, she wiped her blade against her sleeve. Selara exhaled sharply, stepping back. They'll send more. Daniel nodded. I know. Solara's gaze flickered. Then we need to end this before they do. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What are you saying? Selara took a slow breath. Yes, I did. Then she looked him dead in the eye and said, I'm taking you to them. Daniel's stomach dropped. Selara continued, voice steady. After you? Her lips curled slightly. You want to stop running? You want to know why they're... Then let's take the fight to them. Daniel exhaled slowly. A suicidal plan. A reckless, insane, probably fatal plan. And yet, his blood burned with the idea of it. He met her gaze, already knowing his answer. He smirked. Let's do it. They drove for hours. Through back roads, past ghost towns, into the deepest parts of the state where the land was still untamed, wild. Then finally, Selara sat up straighter. Turn here. Daniel followed her instructions, veering off the main road onto a narrow dirt path. Then, out of nowhere, a structure, hidden between the trees, almost invisible to the untrained eye. A sleek, metallic compound, its design not human. Daniel's pulse spiked. They were here, Solara's people. The ones hunting them, and she had led him straight to them. Daniel inhaled slowly. You sure about this? Selara exhaled, gripping the door handle. Number. The entrance loomed ahead. The metallic doors slid open before they could even knock. They were expected. Selara walked first, her movements controlled, precise. But Daniel could feel the tension in her shoulders, the slight hesitation in her step. She was nervous. That was a bad sign, a very bad sign. Then they weren't alone. Figures emerged from the shadows. 4 of them, all violet-skinned, all armed, all watching them with disdain. And in the center of them, a woman, tall, poised, deadly. Her silver-gray hair was braided, her black eyes sharp with something unreadable. But what unsettled Daniel the most, she didn't look surprised. She had been waiting. Selara went rigid beside him. The woman smiled. Welcome home, Selara. This wasn't a last stand. This wasn't a fight. This was a setup. And he had just walked straight into it. They took his gun first. then his knife, then the backup pistol he had hidden in his boot. Selara didn't fight them, neither did he. There was no point. They were led into a circular chamber, a war room maybe, a control center. Daniel wasn't sure, and that put him at a disadvantage. The woman who had greeted them stepped forward, clasping her hands behind her back. "Did you really think we wouldn't find you, Selara?" Selara didn't flinch. "I made sure you did." A pause. The woman's lips curled. "So you led him straight to us?" Daniel's pulse spiked. There it was. The betrayal. Daniel clenched his jaw. "You sold me out?" Selara didn't look at him. She didn't answer. The woman smirked. "She understands her place." Selara's jaw tightened. Daniel saw it. The barely contained anger. The tension coiling in her shoulders, but she wasn't moving. Daniel exhaled sharply. "So, what now? You kill me?" The woman tilted her head. "For that. Kill you?" She chuckled. "No, Mr. Kane. You're far too valuable." Daniel stiffened. Selara spoke before he could. The woman laughed softly. Selara's fists clenched. "I did what you wanted. Now let him go. You don't give orders here, Selara." That wasn't the deal. The woman's gaze sharpened. "Where your loyalties lie." Selara's breath hitched. "The deal? The deal was that you return to us and prove." The woman's voice dropped to a whisper. Silence. "Kill him." Selara didn't move. Daniel inhaled slowly, his heart pounding. And then he saw it. The moment she realized. The moment she broke. Selara turned. Her black eyes locked onto his. And then she moved. But not toward him. Not toward them. Selara turned on her own people. The room erupted. Everything happened at once. Selara grabbed Daniel's arm, yanking him down just as a blast of blue energy sliced through the air. Daniel hit the ground, rolling, reaching for a weapon, any weapon. Selara was already moving, a blur of speed and violence. She tore through them, a knife to the ribs, a strike to the throat. A stolen weapon turned against its owner. It was brutal. It was merciless. But it wasn't enough. The woman who had spoken was still standing, still watching, still smiling. Selara panted, her chest rising and falling. The woman's smirk deepened. "No, Selara." She lifted a hand. "This is over." 4 more soldiers stepped into the room. It's only just begun. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed Selara's wrist. "Run." And for the first time since they met, she didn't argue. She ran. They tore through the compound, dodging blasts of energy, weaving through corridors, past bodies, past alarms screaming in the air. There was only one exit, only one chance. The docking bay. A single sleek ship waited, its engines already primed, already fueled. Selara's breath was ragged. "We're not going to make it." Daniel shoved her forward. "Keep moving." The air shook as another explosion detonated behind them. Selara hit the ramp first, grabbing the controls, overriding the lock. Daniel covered her, firing a stolen gun over his shoulder. The soldiers were close. Too close. Then, the doors slammed shut. The ship's engines roared. Selara turned to him. Daniel exhaled sharply. They had won, but Selara's expression was haunted. Daniel swallowed. "They'll never take you back now." Selara exhaled, her voice barely a whisper. "I know." Daniel exhaled slowly, dragging a hand over his face as he leaned back against the bulkhead. His ribs ached from the fight, his knuckles raw. Selara stood at the controls. The ship responded instantly, shifting to autopilot. They were free. Daniel finally pushed himself off the wall, stretching the stiffness from his muscles as he moved toward the main corridor. His curiosity tugged at him, pushing him to explore, to understand the vessel that had just become their escape pod, their home, their battlefield. Selara let out a slow breath. "You were reckless back there," she murmured. Daniel turned slightly, glancing at her over his shoulder. "Decided to turn on your own people." "Yeah, well, you were the one who Selara didn't respond right away." "It was never my people who wanted you dead," she said finally. "Wanted to control me. It was the ones who." Daniel studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Common enemy. Then I guess we have a..." Then, instead of answering, she took a step closer. Daniel's breath caught as she reached up, her fingers ghosting over a scrape along his jawline. A wound he hadn't even realized was there. "You're hurt," she murmured. Daniel smirked. "You should see the other guy." Selara exhaled sharply, shaking her head, but instead of retreating, she moved closer. Too close. Daniel didn't stop her. For the past few days, they had been enemies, then reluctant allies, then fugitives on the run. But beneath all of it, there had been something else, something unspoken, something neither of them had dared to acknowledge, until now. Selara's fingers trailed lower, resting against his collarbone, tracing the bruises along his skin. Her touch was cool, careful, but deliberate. Daniel's pulse quickened. "Selara," he started, his voice rough. She silenced him with a look, a challenge, a question, and then he gave in. His hands found her waist, gripping the fabric of her suit as he pulled her against him. Selara inhaled sharply but didn't resist. Instead, she leaned in, and then she kissed him. It wasn't careful. It wasn't hesitant. It was fire meeting fire, an explosion between them, a culmination of every near-death moment, every lingering glance, every unspoken thing they had both tried to ignore. Daniel lifted her effortlessly, hands gripping her waist as he placed her onto the cool surface of a metal table. The hum of the ship faded into the background, drowned out by the sound of their breathing, their bodies pressing together as tension turned into something undeniable. Their voices tangled between touches, murmured words, teasing, heat. Hours passed in a blur. By the time it was over, both of them were breathless, their bodies damp with sweat, their skin marked by the night's intensity. Selara lay beside him on the table, staring at the ceiling, her silver-gray hair fanned out around her. Daniel ran a hand down her arm, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her skin. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" he murmured. Selara turned her head to look at him. "There's no turning back now." Daniel smirked. "Good." And for the first time since they met, Selara smiled. The ship's sleek hull cut through the thick clouds like a blade, slipping past the planetary defense grid undetected. Outside the viewport, a planet unfolded beneath them, familiar yet impossibly alien. It was like staring at Earth through a distorted mirror. "Welcome to Vale R," Selara murmured. Daniel exhaled, his breath fogging slightly against the reinforced glass. "Looks peaceful," he admitted. Solara's fingers danced over the ship's console, overriding the planetary network's scans, hiding their presence within the electromagnetic fields of the landscape. "It is." She didn't look at him, and it has to stay that way. They dipped lower, skimming over rolling hills and dense foliage before approaching a stretch of barren, rocky terrain. There were no cities here, no life, just jagged cliffs and endless stone. Selara brought the ship down into a narrow ravine, the vessel's underbelly barely scraping past the tight walls. A metallic platform emerged from the rock, extending like an outstretched hand. As soon as the ship touched down, the landing pad retracted, swallowing them into the mountain itself. Darkness enveloped them. Daniel's pulse quickened. He had seen hidden military bases before, but this wasn't human technology. The sheer precision, the seamless way the rock and metal moved together, was far beyond anything Earth's governments could dream of building. The ship settled with a soft hiss. Selara shut down the engines, exhaling quietly before standing. "Come on, we don't have long." Daniel followed her down the ramp. The chamber around them was vast, its walls smooth and curved, with no visible lights and yet no shadows. The very surface of the structure seemed to glow faintly, responding to their presence. His boots echoed slightly as they walked deeper into the underground facility. A door slid open ahead, revealing a large chamber lined with sleek consoles, translucent panels filled with shifting alien symbols, and beyond that, a single window. Daniel stopped in his tracks. Through the reinforced glass, an entire underground city sprawled beneath them, carved into the mountain's heart. People moved through the streets below. They looked like Selara, tall, elegant, skin in varying shades of violet and indigo. Their hair, darker silver, reflected the city's glow. A hidden civilization, an entire world beneath the surface. Daniel's throat tightened. He turned to Selara. "How long has this been here?" Selara studied the view for a moment before speaking. "Since before your ancestors discovered fire." Daniel exhaled slowly. "They've been here the whole time," he muttered, "right under our noses." Solara's gaze flicked to him. "Yes." She walked ahead, leading him down another corridor through another set of concealed doors. Finally, they entered a private chamber smaller, quieter, a safe house within a safe house. Selara activated the security grid with a flick of her fingers, sealing them inside. Daniel leaned against the nearest wall, crossing his arms. "All right," he said. "You brought me here for a reason. Start talking." Selara exhaled sharply. She leaned against the central console, her expression unreadable. "My people don't hate yours, Daniel," she began. "We don't see humans as enemies. But we know what happens when a powerful species discovers something weaker than them." Daniel frowned. "We're not stronger than you." Solara's lips curled slightly. "Not physically, not technologically." She hesitated. "But there's something more dangerous about humanity. Something that makes your kind unpredictable." She met his gaze, black eyes unblinking. "Your numbers." Daniel blinked. Selara continued. You breed too fast, expand too fast. Your species spreads like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Daniel stiffened, but she didn't stop. If humanity ever discovered us, truly discovered us, it wouldn't stop with simple contact. It wouldn't stop at diplomacy or peaceful exchange. Her voice was quiet now. You would take... Daniel frowned. You don't know that. Selara's gaze sharpened. Don't I? She turned, pressing a sequence on the console. A holographic display flickered to life, showing images, historical footage. Earth, wars, colonization, empires expanding, consuming smaller nations, weaker civilizations, indigenous cultures wiped out, their lands stolen, their people displaced. Daniel's jaw tightened. This is history, Selara said. Your history, and it repeats. The holograms shifted, morphing into projections of Earth's future. Population charts, resource consumption, climate change, the need for expansion, the need for new worlds. Daniel swallowed hard. Selara's voice was softer now. We've watched you for centuries. We've seen how your leaders think, how they act when they find something they want. She met his eyes. If humanity knew about us, knew about Valar, how long do you think it would take before someone decided to claim it? Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down, he knew she was right. Selara turned off the hologram, leaving them in silence. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. Selara nodded. It's the only way to survive. So, that's why you stay hidden. Daniel stared at the floor, processing. He had spent years chasing the truth, determined to prove that aliens existed. Now, he had that proof. And suddenly, he wasn't sure if the truth deserved to be known. After a long moment, he looked back at Selara. So, what now? Selara studied him for a beat. Then she spoke. Now, you have a choice. Daniel arched a brow. Oh yeah? You can go back. Pretend you never saw any of this. Live your life. She stepped closer. Safe, hidden. Daniel smirked. Or, Selara's expression darkened, or you help me stop the people who want to expose us. Daniel hesitated. He had spent his entire life looking for the truth. And now, he had to decide what to do with it. He met Selara's gaze, something burning behind his eyes. When do we start? Selara's lips curved. Now. He exhaled slowly. So, who exactly are we stopping? Selara tapped the console, and a new display flickered to life, a series of grainy, intercepted transmissions. Alien voices spoke in low, urgent tones, their language unfamiliar to him, but the tension in Selara's face was enough to tell him what it meant. A faction within my own people, she explained. They don't just fear humans, they want to strike first. To ensure you never have the chance to find us. Daniel frowned. You mean... Yes. Selara's black eyes were sharp, a threat. They want to wipe out Earth before it ever becomes silence, stretched between them. Daniel let out a low breath, running a hand through his hair. Care that not all humans are bad. And I'm guessing they don't. Selara's expression hardened. They don't believe in mercy. The weight of it all settled on Daniel's shoulders. For so long, he had been chasing the truth. Now, the truth was looking right back at him, demanding something in return. He had a choice. Walk away. Or fight. His gaze flicked to Selara. She was already preparing, strapping a sleek holster to her thigh, securing a curved blade to her hip. Every movement was precise, efficient. She wasn't waiting for him to decide, because she already knew his answer. Daniel exhaled sharply. Damn world. All right, he muttered, pushing off the console. Let's go, save the Selara smirked. Took you long enough. They moved through the hidden corridors of Valar undetected. Selara led the way, her every step sure and deliberate, while Daniel followed close behind, a stolen alien weapon in his grip. The enemy base was nestled within the deepest sector of the underground city, a covert stronghold where the extremist faction operated in secret. If they succeeded in launching their attack, Earth would never see it coming, and that was exactly why Daniel and Selara had to stop them. As they approached the facility's perimeter, Selara pressed a hand against the wall. The surface rippled beneath her touch, revealing a glowing security panel. We'll only get one chance at this, she murmured. If we're detected, we won't be, Daniel cut in. Selara arched a brow. Daniel smirked. Trust me, I've been breaking into places I wasn't supposed to be since I was 16. Selara exhaled, shaking her head. Just don't get yourself killed. She bypassed the security in seconds, and the doors slid open with a soft hiss. They slipped inside. The base was eerily silent, its corridors illuminated by faint strips of glowing light. Advanced displays flickered along the walls, cycling through streams of alien text. Then footsteps. Selara reacted instantly, pressing Daniel against the nearest wall just as a patrol passed by. The guards walked in perfect synchronization, their weapons strapped to their backs, oblivious to the intruders hiding just inches away. When they were gone, Selara released him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come on." They navigated deeper into the facility, moving like shadows. Then, at the heart of it all, they found their target, the central control hub, a massive chamber filled with sleek consoles, pulsing energy conduits, and at the very center, a towering device, its structure humming with raw power. The weapon, if activated, it would send an undetectable energy surge straight to Earth's atmosphere, destabilizing the planet's magnetic field and rendering all human technology useless. A world thrown into chaos. A world ripe for extinction. Selara didn't hesitate. She darted toward the console, fingers flying over the alien interface, overriding the system with rapid efficiency. Daniel moved to cover her, keeping his weapon raised as he scanned the entrance. Then alarms blared. Shit. The base was waking up. Selara cursed under her breath. "They've locked me out. I need more time." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Then I'll buy you some." The doors burst open, and the fight began. Energy blasts streaked through the air, striking the walls in bursts of crackling light. Daniel ducked behind a console, firing back with deadly precision. Selara worked furiously, her focus unshaken even as chaos erupted around her. More soldiers stormed in. Daniel took down 2, then 3, but they just kept coming. His pulse pounded. Selara. Almost there. A final keystroke. A system-wide failure. The weapon powered down. The entire base plunged into silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then Selara grabbed his wrist. "We need to go. Now." They ran. Blasts chased their heels as they weaved through the corridors, dodging return fire, sprinting back toward the exit. And just as they reached the final doors, a figure stepped into their path. The faction leader, cold, calculating. A woman with silver hair and black eyes that burned with quiet fury. Selara stopped short, her hand tightening around her blade. The woman tilted her head. "You betrayed your own people for a human." Selara's jaw clenched. Daniel raised his weapon. "Yeah? And what the hell does that make you?" The woman's gaze flicked to him, then back to Selara. "You've chosen your side," she said. "Now live with it." She moved in a blur, striking out with deadly speed. Selara met her head on. The fight was brutal, lightning fast. A blur of blades and precision strikes, neither giving an inch. But Selara had something her opponent didn't. Daniel. He fired a single shot, a calculated risk. Selara ducked at the last second, and the blast hit its mark. The faction leader staggered, her eyes wide with shock, then narrowed in fury. "You..." She never finished. Selara's blade sliced clean through. Silence. The woman collapsed. Selara exhaled sharply, chest rising and falling. Daniel lowered his gun. "You okay?" Selara wiped her blade clean. "Let's go." They didn't stop running until they reached the ship. The moment they were inside, Selara launched them into the sky, streaking past the planetary defenses before anyone could react. Valar shrank behind them. Earth loomed ahead. They had won. For now. As the stars blurred around them, Daniel exhaled, glancing at Selara. She looked tired, but not broken. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "So, what happens next?" Selara met his gaze. For the first time, there was no hesitation. "No more running," she murmured. "No more secrets." Daniel smirked. "I like the sound of that." Selara exhaled. "Good." And then she kissed him. It was slow, intentional, a moment suspended in time, the weight of everything they had survived, melting into something undeniable. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel grinned. "Partner in crime." "So, does this mean I officially get to be your Selara?" smirked. "Don't push your luck, Kane." The ship disappeared into the stars, and the story ended.